Hi, and welcome to this first class in our new VR course. We're excited to have this course because this is an incredibly fast-changing and, well, really interesting new area.
It really is fast-changing, and it's got a lot of interest from many people. There's a lot of money being put into it, and it really is kind of the buzzword out here in LA right now is various people trying to figure out the process and actually how to monetize it.
Yeah, from the explosion that's made possible with mobile VR, this is the Gear VR. We'll be looking at this later in the term, and we've got a Samsung phone in there, and this is the kind of, I guess, one of the first really professional kind of units that's come on the market. But there's also the cardboard, and these are allowing amazing stuff to be done right away. Of course, this is the mobile end. At the other end, we have the Gear hooked up to the computer, the PC, with, great graphics cards, which is the Oculus Rift kind of model. Now, that's huge amount of funding from Facebook, but quite different in the sense that you're running off high performance graphics and doing stuff differently. Nevertheless, there's only the DK1 and the DK2. They haven't actually started shipping actual units yet. So that's kind of how new it is. And we're going to be covering all of that in this course.
Yeah, in addition to that, in this overview and covering the basics of that, we're going to dive into, really specifics as well. But we're going to start out with a bit of history today.
Yeah, we're going to cut in a second to an interview I recorded at ICT. So University of Southern California's ICT Mixed Reality Unit with Mark Bolas. Now, Mark and that team is obviously an educational facility that's been doing VR research, and you can draw a direct line from Google Cardboard, this Gear VR, and in fact Oculus Rift, because one of their founders actually worked there as an assistant. So all of the sort of stuff that we'll be talking about, in many respects, you can sort of thank the guys at the Mixed Reality Lab for doing it. So we're going to go and talk to Mark there. I was really honored to be able to sit down with him and go through some of the history to sort of set up the course for you.
Well, with everything changing so quickly, we're going to cover that from a basic level, lots of interviews. We're also going to get pretty hardcore taking a look at the tech. I think a couple good examples to kind of use as case studies of what we're going to do is camera rigs. Take a look at your Dragon rig with 5 cameras and a very large rig. What do you do with that? And why use that? And when would you want to use that versus these newer GoPro rigs? And there are lots of pre-made GoPro rigs, but a lot of people are actually building their own through 3D printing. It's one of the great things about 3D printing. And why are they doing that? That's what we're going to take a look at. I think another one is audio. Being a vision guy at heart, I guess I didn't really consider this, but when you're on set, you usually have your audio guys around. Well, in an immersive live action environment, those guys can't hide anywhere. Well, maybe behind a rock. But for the most part, what are the challenges doing that? How do you record that audio? We've hooked up with some really interesting people, including someone who's built their own microphone with a 3D printer. Really cool tech, so you can actually use it to acquire your audio and then electronically process it in post to make it pan and do things correctly for the viewer.
Now, of course, we could sort of attempt to do, say, a 300-level course right now on just, say, stitching in VR. The trouble is there is no one solution for doing that. It's just changing so rapidly that this is like a constantly evolving thing. So even as we're recording this, there'll be new stuff coming out. Well, we kind of know there's new stuff coming out at NAB. We just can't talk about it this week, but we'll be covering that later in the term. So we'll be trying to get the full range of stuff. But as I say, some classes will be more like an interview, getting the perspective from distributors, people that you can get your stuff uploaded to that can get it out, people that are doing it so you can understand the problems that they're facing, and then some more hands-on stuff with how to optimize for the various different head rigs and stuff.
Okay, well, that's a bit of an overview. Let's go ahead and dive in now. Let's get into the meat of the course and go ahead and let's cross that interview that Mike spoke about earlier.
Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I've been incredibly keen to talk to you because I so respect the role that ICT's played in the VR community for some time. But if I can just focus on the last few years for a second, and you've had sort of 3 pivotal IEEE contributions that have really spawned much of what we're sort of thinking about today in the VR community.
Well, yeah, it started originally with a head-mounted display that was sort of our holy grail, and then we tried to figure out how to get the best parts of that out into the community at low cost. And we did that through 3 different papers or posters at the IEEE conference.
So what was the first of those?
The first was this display right here. It's the Wide 5 display, and it was done in conjunction with my company, Fake Space Labs, and the School of Cinematic Arts here. Office of Naval Research funded it, and they wanted a lightweight head mount, something you could really move your head quickly in, but it has to still make you feel immersed. And that's important. A lot of the head mounts up until this time were narrow field of view. Right. And when you lose that peripheral vision, you just lose a lot of that visceral feeling of immersion. So this is what we came up with, and it's extremely lightweight. The head mount itself is very thin. The real breakthrough here was the lens design done by Ian McDowell at Fake Space. And he came up with these lenses that give 150-degree field of view.
Oh, really? Well, that's really good.
But they're only a half an inch thick. You can't really see through the fiber here, but they're half an inch thick. So it led to this result that enabled us to have a great display. We coupled that with a phase space tracking system. So we can walk anywhere in this 30-foot by 70-foot room, and the head mount is tracked. We can put dots in our hands, and those are tracked, and we can really have the holy grail of immersion, just completely surrounded by imagery, and you can walk around. There's one more really key point. This display used displays that came from, or would come from cell phones. When we did this design decision, we didn't know if cell phones would go that way or not. The iPhone hadn't come out yet.
Oh, really?
But we gambled that micro displays were not the way to go, and that we just took a gamble that medium format displays, which I would call a cell phone display, would come out. And just a couple of years after this came out, the iPhone came out, and it was the right choice to make.
So what year was this?
This would have been about 2006.
Right. So, I mean, that field of view seems really impressive even by today's standards. What was the kind of resolution, what you were looking at?
So the resolution is an important thing in terms of how we handled that. Rather than spreading the resolution out evenly over the whole field of view, the lens design is extremely warped, like a fisheye lens. As a result, we have 4 times more resolution in the center of the field than we do in the periphery. In those days, we had to use an FPGA to remap it all. Of course, today you can just do it in a shader. But that enabled the resolution to be pretty high in the center and quite low around the edges, but you just don't notice it because it's in your periphery.
So latency is always an issue. How did that sort of stack up?
Well, because we use the FPGA, we only had one frame, so to speak, of latency, and it was actually how you'd fill the pixels. And then you just have the latency of the tracker, and the phase-based system back then was running 240 hertz or faster, and they're up to 960 hertz now. Right. So the tracking delay really wasn't an issue. So that was just our job to make sure to render quickly.
Right, and it's still working today?
Oh yeah, it's on because we were just doing a study today.
Oh, excellent. And so what was the second of the IEEE posters or papers?
So this was pre those posters. So
okay, really?
This was the holy grail, and then we suddenly realized we have to get this out in the world. The experiences this was giving people were really quite compelling and amazing. And because people had gotten used to narrow field of view displays, the community had sort of forgotten that virtual reality could be really immersive. They were used to these consumer displays that were sort of killing immersion. So we wanted to re-communicate to the community, no, VR can really be immersive, and this is how to do it. So we started with these lenses. They came from a Boom display. They're called Leap lenses, and my company, Fake Space Labs, used these for years. And one weekend, I just took these. I took a couple iPhones, I put them together, and we had already worked on software to do real-time rendering on a phone. And with 2 of these and these lenses, we got an extremely compelling 120-degree field of view image on phones. So we did a poster that year called a smartphone-based HMD, and the entire idea was to communicate this idea that phone technology can do this now, and if you do decent optics, you can start feeling immersed. And that was in 2011.
So even though the iPhone, by today's standard, has a lower resolution screen, because you had 2 iPhones, effectively you had very high resolution.
Yeah, in 2011, I wanted 2 screens, so we could keep the resolution up. Now, of course, the screens are giving us, it depends how much resolution you want, but the screens are pretty darn high resolution even for a single phone.
I guess the other thing is on the original iPhone, it was quite small, so to get a good intraocular separation, if you tried to do it with one, probably wouldn't have been viable either.
You're absolutely right. These lenses were designed for about a 2¼ inch image, actually because they were designed for 2¼ inch film. So this iPhone was perfect for it. Now, moving forward past that then, so when you talk about resolution and screens, you have to realize that you're always also talking about field of view. So we got the idea out that you could do that, but people still weren't biting. So we really wanted a compelling form factor that made people understand you can do this on phones.
Now, was that because of the complexity of those particular lenses? Because, I mean, I would have thought everyone would have jumped at an iPhone.
That's true. Not everybody could grab these lenses.
Right.
They're hard to get. So we did exactly what you would think, which is we went with really low-cost lenses. These come from a little stereo viewer. You can buy them for $1 for 2. And we decided to give up on the field of view just temporarily, and which also allowed us to use a single iPhone. So on this device, it just folded up, and you would slide in a single iPhone to it, and that would give you a complete VR experience. So it got across the fact that you could do the rendering, you could do the tracking, and you could do a VR experience, all in a fold-up device.
This looks exactly like the precursor to cardboard, which
yeah, well, we did this. This was a couple of years before cardboard, and it really was the start of our effort to So we're in a university. So the number one goal of a university is to disseminate knowledge. That's our job. It's not good enough just to invent stuff and sit on it. And we're trying to figure out how best to influence the community. We did it as a publication at IEEE in 2011, but that really wasn't doing it. So we got a little more dramatic in 2012, and we handed out these envelopes, hundreds of them, to everybody that went to IEEE VR. And we decided we're going to give everybody VR and a phone. And that was in 2012, so they just opened up this envelope, they got the instructions, and then they could make it. And that led to us understanding and starting to use the power of the open source community. We realized that we need to release these plans online, and that would be the best way to influence the industry.
And the next IEEE step in that progression?
Well, like I say, we're happy with this. It got across what the cardboard does today. It got across you can fold it up and make it all work, and it's cheap. But it didn't have a wide enough field of view. It didn't really grab you like I like to grab people in VR. So
I'm guessing that you're heading towards this.
We are.
You were very kind to actually give me one of these when I visited before, and I was gobsmacked to discover that that was a lens that would do what you wanted it to do. But
so we had to figure out what's wide enough. There's somewhere is a sweet spot of being wide enough to grab you, but not so wide that I really need large lenses. The lenses in the Wide 5 are fantastic, but it's a fair amount of glass.
Yep.
And we wanted to figure out that sweet spot. So to do it, we went back to the Wide 5, and we ran a series of scenarios that had the full field of view, and then we artificially cropped it to be narrow, and we artificially cropped it to be narrower, and we just moved on that cropping until we found the number. And that was right around 90 degrees. 90 is right on the edge of being a little too narrow. But once we knew that it was right about 90, then we could simply figure out the magnification lens we needed. Turned out to be about a 7x lens. And then we went back to an old trick I used to use. Aspheric lenses are great, but people think they're no good for magnification because they're used in this mode to magnify. But when you look at it like this, you have to magnify the other way around. So you can make this lens amazing just by flipping it the other way around. And if you do that, it's not a bad lens. And in fact, it has distortions that work to your advantage. Just like the Wide 5 distorted the imagery to be more compressed in the center, these A-spheres do that as well. Huh. So we came out with the second generation of our cardboard-like viewer, which is this one here. And this was the Field of View to Go Model D, we called it. This used these magic lenses, and it used a single phone, and it still had a fold-up, a very inexpensive way of making it. And we published those plans as well. If you go online today, you can find them. It's a whole kit of how to build it with an X-Acto knife, buy these lenses, and a little bit of cardboard or foam core. And this one seemed to do really well. People enjoyed it, and it grabbed you. It was the one where people that hadn't really experienced why VR is so special, when they looked through this one, they got it. They went, oh, this is a good experience. I get VR now. So that 90-degree sweet spot was really important to find.
Yeah, and of course, we don't stop there, right? Because that's the same progression that gets us to the Gear VR with the Samsung phone today, right? I mean, it's that terrific idea of...
in fact, Samsung used these lenses in their very first prototypes.
Right.
We tried to get them everywhere we could, and they thanked us because they said they used these to start with. They've gone to different lenses now, but this was a great starting point.
Yeah, I mean, the notion of being able to popularize the actual experience through not having very expensive hardware is a really significant step because, you know, obviously it's great, you know, being able to don gear which is connected to a computer and very expensive, but not everybody can do that. But I think the second advantage of this approach is that it became a mobile VR experience.
Right.
Which is quite significant actually because, I mean, obviously today we have both, but a mobile experience is very, very accessible.
I really believe there's two ways to experience immersion. One is by mounting it on your head, which is a head-mounted experience. But the other is a headset experience, or a handset. I'm sorry, there's a headset experience, which is a head mount.
Yep.
But there's a handset experience. And that's more along the lines of, could you grab that one right there?
This one?
No, the next one there.
Yep.
That's more along the lines of this one. This is the Field of View to Go Model D.
Yep.
But the next year at IEEE, we started distributing open source plans for 3D printing models and other form factors. So this one we love. This is an old iPod. So it weighs nothing, it costs nothing, and it just clips right in. And then you have a mobile VR experience. I'm looking at Mars here right now. And one of the reasons we loved this was it's not just low cost because of the lenses, but it's low cost because of this, and anybody can have it. Really got that idea across.
Yeah, and also the idea of being able to tap into the 3D printing environment gives a form factor that is, quite solid and robust.
Well, plus we had the problem that there's how many different flavors of mobile phones out there.
Yeah.
So by 3D printing them, we could put out plans for all the different flavors of mobile phones and still have them all attached really nicely.
Can I switch gears for a second and discuss this one I nearly picked up a moment ago?
Sure.
Because I found this to be fascinating. You showed me an example of this once before with a, I think it was like a comic book kind of example. And well, maybe you could explain what this is and also the innovations in terms of sensing when I'm actually putting it up to my face.
This is one of my favorite devices because it's really a hybrid device where you can still use content that you're used to. You can use written text, and you can still use your fingers to interact with an immersive environment. So in this case, we have an example of an organic chemistry molecule, and you can read the text right out of a textbook. But if you go to the next page, you get a schematic of the molecule, and you get interaction controls to work with it. So I'm gonna have to take the lenses off so you can see this one. But well, let me find the molecule here. Okay, so now I'm looking at a 3D model of this molecule, this being the schematic view and that being an immersive view. But I can see you're using both your thumbs so that you can control it. Right.
Yeah. So now we've gone beyond just what we're getting from
there's the molecule.
Yeah.
And here I'm going to spin it in front of myself just by using my thumb to control it.
Yeah.
Here I can decide if I want to investigate individual bonds. So you can see I'm highlighting different bonds by hitting those.
Yeah.
And I can move through the model. So here I'm zooming back and zooming in. I love this form factor because it gives you just a natural way to interact with the model. It gives you an immersive view, and it gives you real high resolution text that you can interact with. We call it the inverse. And I'm waiting to see what happens with this as well.
Yeah, the version that I played with that you'd prototyped up, I think, had like a comic book thing. And I was literally looking at the pages, and you said, I'll hold it up to your eyes. And I put it up, and suddenly, of course, it knew that the iPad had gone up. It knew it was close to my face, and so it just went to the immersive VR view. And then when I pulled it back down again, it wasn't there. And I was like, wait a second.
Right.
And of course, it was sensing what I was doing. But I thought that was really interesting because we're getting sort of more interaction into the environment. I know one of the things that you've done here at ICT, in addition to this work, is bigger scale work that allows me, for example, to go into VR environments where I can see my hands, or in fact my body, which I guess gets back to where you started.
Absolutely. So we feel really happy. We have accomplished influencing the industry and proving that the technology is ready to go. But while that's a step forward, in a weird way, it's also a step back for us because these devices are still subsets of our Holy Grail system. So we're still doing research on the Holy Grail system, figuring out what we think people are going to need another 2 to 5 years from now. So walking through environments is one, interacting with the hands is another. There's still a lot of modalities we have with the human body that haven't made it into VR yet. And that's our job now as researchers to figure out, again, what's really valuable, how can I make it something accessible to everybody, and then how do I disseminate the knowledge out?
Let me ask you some of those questions about the sort of future-looking stuff. So, for example, I found it immensely powerful when I donned your rig here and could see my own hands. Now, some people have tried that by putting like a structure sensor on top of that. That adds an enormous amount of weight to the front of a headset. You had it through gloves. Do you think that technology will come in the form of a glove, or do you think it's going to be some kind of sensor or whatever to gauge? Because it just felt so right having my hands in view.
Right. So 2 things. One is the reason research labs exist is to sort of have overkill equipment to figure out what's important. So gloves and full finger tracking in gloves is how we're probably going to do the research because we know it works and it doesn't have artifacts. In the long run, then a simplified approach is going to distill out of that. And it's most likely going to be some form of photogrammetry or finding 3D geometry from space, SLAM-based modeling or something like that. And we're working on that as well. So I do believe that we'll be able to do gloveless interaction with hands, and there are systems out there getting pretty close to being good enough now. That being said, I still think there's a huge desire for tactile feedback. So one of the tricks we do for that we like quite a bit is you just use your own finger for the feedback. So if you want to grab a virtual object, you just pinch and grab it. This is based on an old fake space product I have where we literally had metal contacts between the fingers. And it's a form of passive haptics. So you grab it, you feel like you're holding something, and you've gotten the feedback that you're touching. And we find that to be a very positive form of feedback. And that's what's important about all of this, is that that feedback loop has to be accurate. It has to be causal. So step one is when you move your head, there can't be a lot of delay, and it has to be causal. But we're going to find all those problems as we move into haptics and all the other forms of interaction in virtual worlds.
So what you let me use was a system that had my hands, and then there were just Perspex pieces of plastic in front of me.
Right.
And what I found, of course, when I had the headset on, is that I could see buttons there. And when I reached down with my hand, I could press a button. Of course, I touched the Perspex, but I didn't care. I was seeing a button being pressed.
Right.
I felt a thing. And so it just really lifted it. It was an extraordinary difference. It doesn't sound like it if you've not experienced it, but experiencing it, huge difference.
Again, we did that system to get across this concept of passive haptics. And when you feel it with your fingertip, and if you have a causal reaction, then you believe you did it.
Yeah.
We actually won a best poster on that one because we did a little trick, which is we just do a line of sight trick for where your finger is, where the virtual button is, and where your eye is. And if we just cast a ray there and determine where you think your finger's pointing, then we can have lots of other tracking errors, and it works pretty accurately. We did that on plain pieces of Plex, as you're saying, on wood. We've also done it with a large touch display surface, which gives us really fine control. Of course, the person in the virtual world doesn't see it at all, but they feel the fine control.
Right.
So surrounding people with these control panels seems to be a modality that people are going to want moving forward.
So what are the sort of primary issues that you think are at the edge of needing to be solved? I mean, for example, I'd love your opinion on what you think a correct immersive refresh rate is. Oh,
it's funny. My first big foray into virtual reality was a device we built called the Boom. It was a counterbalance device that had tracking on it and CRT displays. And I didn't realize how good it was until I've recently seen demos from companies like Valve that have got a really high refresh rate. And when I saw it, I realized, well, I've seen this before, this experience. And I realized it was the Boom because I had CRTs with phosphor. And in those days, we actually made the CRTs ourselves. You'd pick
really?
the phosphor yourself, yeah.
Wow.
Because we needed really high refresh rate phosphors because we were doing field sequential color. So as a result, we were in the millisecond range for refresh times. And I believe that that's the most important thing, which isn't necessarily the frame rate. Well, I'm sorry, there's two important things. One is the frame rate, how many frames per second we have. But the other is the shutter time, so to speak. In a film camera, that would be a rotary shutter that would spin in front of the gate. But we can artificially create a shutter like that. So, I'm sorry, I got a little crazy there. Let me explain both. So on frames per second, we definitely want 60. Ideally, we want more than 100, and I've seen up to 180, and it's great. The more you give me, the better. But that goes hand in hand with the shutter time. And a shutter time of about 2 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds appears to be one of the best. So a 10 millisecond refresh rate would be the frames per second. That'd be 100 frames per second. But even given 100 frames per second, we want to decrease the amount of time that the image is shown for. And what that basically does is, just as when you're filming, it reduces the blur of the image. So you get pulses of the images as you go.
Yep.
Those two go hand in hand, and together they're really starting to create experiences that are really, things just feel solid. They feel like they're out there.
So Sony's got some, monitors that are running at 600 hertz. And I've actually heard researchers say that they think that at sort of those levels, there is a perceivable, valid difference over like 100.
My business partner Ian McDowell and I built a 2 kilohertz display long ago for fun by hacking a DLP projector for other things. And I remember seeing a line model of just a round sphere bouncing around inside a box. And at 2 kilohertz, it was a completely different experience.
Right.
It looked solid. It looked like an oscilloscope, if you ever have looked, again, a CRT-based device, but an old CRT-based oscilloscope. So I can't tell you yet what the upper range is. I can only tell you that more is better, and 60 you better get.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a sort of like a camera obscura, like, actual real, obviously there was no shutter, there's no delay because it's real life going through lenses. And I have to say, I was stunned because it wasn't very bright. Obviously the scene wasn't particularly interesting, it was just out sort of the other side of where we were in Bristol. But I could not get over the continuous motion. It was just, it was remarkable, and I hadn't anticipated that because, of course, I'd never seen this before. And yeah, so I mean, there are theories that, like, 90 is enough or 120 is enough, and I certainly would have subscribed to that had I not seen some of these higher things. But I'm so glad to hear that you think it's valid at these high levels.
What I would love to see is if a 2 millisecond shutter time makes the most sense, then that would equate to a 500 hertz frame rate. And I would love to see that, where we have a 100% duty cycle at 500 hertz.
And that does seem inside the realms of technical possibility, because, I mean, it's not like, as I say, there are monitors at like 600, so it's been done at a monitor level.
Oh, we'll get there if it makes it better. I mean, the field's here to stay.
And if we get back to field of view for a second, obviously pivotal. You had a great role in re-educating the market on that. What would be your current kind of wish list for field of view?
Again, it's whenever you get more, you want to hang on to it.
Okay.
So 150 is a workable field of view, and I like it quite a bit. I could get a little more, and because you can even see the edges at 150. But to me, that's really the next plateau we have to hit.
And we haven't discussed audio at all. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because we've been talking about immersion, and something that's really helpful in immersing you in an environment is sound. Where are you at with sound? Have you done much research in this area?
I did in the past, and I've been sort of staying away from it recently. There's a lot of good people working on it. And also there's an inherent issue that I think people are going to avoid for a couple of years, and then they'll finally take it on, which is we need to customize the head-related transform functions for individual pinna. You will hear sound completely differently than I will, because our heads will shadow it differently, and because our ears, our pinna, will shape it differently.
Okay.
And I had quite a few good experiences with a company called Crystal River Engineering, and then a company that's still around called Awesome Inc. And they worked a lot on this idea of having customized pinna, and I really think it's important to have. When I wear this display, there's this interesting effect. If I wear this display, when I hear sounds in the outside world, this device, I can hear it. It blocks the sounds based on how high they are, because it shadows the sound. Just as that does it, my skull does it as well, except I've lived with my skull forever. So we have to take those sorts of things into consideration.
So I guess the big one to ask you about looking forward is the AR aspects of stuff that we're hearing about, both from the Microsoft Research, Magic Leap, and others. What are your thoughts on AR?
Well, we have a couple AR prototypes that we've worked on through the years. So first off, I don't view virtual reality as being everything. Completely occlusive VR is one kind of an experience, one that I personally am passionate about and have been for 25 years now. And I just adore being in completely immersive worlds. But really, if we look at culture as a whole, we're moving towards mixed environments, mixed reality. And I would consider cell phones to be part of that. When a person has a cell phone in their hand and they're walking down the street, they're in a mixed reality. That's why we call this the Mixed Reality Lab. They are half in this world, they're half with those people, they're half in the real world. So I'm seeing those two things come together. Augmented reality is one way to look at that, where perhaps we'll have images overlaid in the world. But I'd like to broaden the conversation really to look at it as being one that our reality as a whole is becoming mixed with basically computer intelligence, algorithmic intelligence, and real humans and real world artifacts.
Do you think that, I mean, in terms of the AR implementations, like at the moment, I haven't certainly been aware of anyone doing a really good opacity map to get a solidity of an image. I mean, is that a pivotal point, or do we sort of extrapolate, I guess, out when we see these kind of ghosted image?
Well, the most exciting thing for me in AR right now is not the display side at all. It's the sensing side. The ability to do photogrammetry and SLAM-based geometry reconstruction is getting really powerful every year. It's just growing by leaps and bounds. And the demonstration you tried where you touched the perspex, but I have to call it plexiglass. I'll call it Plex. Okay. Also in that demo, you could control a robotic arm, and that arm would go wherever your arm went. And one of the things we found was while we could overlay video for that demonstration, it was far more useful to overlay the point cloud model we could create by we're just using a Connect coming up with a point cloud. And that gave us a much more flexible model. I wasn't limited to a single viewpoint. I had a real 3D model, so now I could rotate and spin around anywhere. That then led us to realize that the ideal viewpoint for the manipulator task wasn't to make the manipulator anthropomorphically as if it was your arm. It was in fact to rotate the user 180 degrees around, and the manipulator became almost a mirror image of your arm. And that turned out to be the ideal viewpoint because your own arm didn't get in the way, and you could really see the task without the manipulator. So but we wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for having a point cloud model of the geometry to begin with.
Let me just clarify that though. So if I was to move to the right, it moves to the right. Okay, so it's, because otherwise if it's just flipped around,
right,
it's in reverse, and I find that the most
right. So it wasn't in reverse. It would do what I was doing.
Right, and that really was a more, I guess it's a thing. It's a liberating thing, isn't it? Really, like why stop at the limit that we inherently have from our own?
Right. So now back to the point about augmented reality. I don't necessarily want to augment exactly reality. I want to break reality. So I can break reality much easier if, for example, I have the 3D geometry, and then I can do things like, well, I'll just be 180 degrees around here, or I'll represent it as a different model. I don't think we're necessarily going to bring the real world as it is into our virtual worlds. I think we're going to bring a surreal version of the real world into our virtual worlds, because that surreal version will be more powerful for the things we want to do.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I'd always assumed that, you know, the inherent problem with, say, Google Glass is it's fixed to my skull and, you know, doesn't understand the world. And once we understood the world and I could put things relative to the desks and stuff, that's what I'd want. Obviously, the classic example is the game of chess where the board isn't there and sits on the table. But what you're saying is that, and that's what really excites me actually, that the idea that we'd have new applications, not just try and do what we do now, because obviously I can just move a chessboard right now with my own hand, but do things I can't do now in a different kind of interpretation that the technology allows. Because I guess that's the thing that we always look for with new technologies, not just to do, like, you know, the radio play when television comes along just gets filmed and put on TV and it's not very successful until someone takes advantage of the new medium. And so what I'm hearing is you're thinking about whole different ways of doing new things that take advantage of the medium that isn't just an extension of what we have now.
That's all I care about. I don't just want to do what we can do now. I can do that now. What I'm interested in are these surreal representations. And to get there, we're surrounded here at the Institute for Creative Technologies in what we call the Mixed Reality Laboratory. It's very technology focused. I have a lot of computer scientists and people working on problems there. But at the same time, on the USC campus in the School of Cinematic Arts, we have the Mixed Reality Studio. And that's really a content-based studio where we have students from the film school working on content questions. And that's where we're really pushing them to come up with abstract representations. What does this medium want to be? And that's where simple things, being able to freeze time, being able to change scale, being able to look through walls. Those are things we can't do in the real world, but they're extremely useful in the virtual world. And
powerful, yeah.
They're powerful, and an important point. For training applications, we're trying to see if by giving people these superhuman powers can translate back into the real world again. So if I can freeze time in a virtual world, then I get used to that ability. So let's say I'm in a situation where there's a lot of people around me and somebody directs a threat at me, and I have to decide what to do in a hurry. In the real world, it should be nice if I could just stop, take a moment, freeze everybody, take a breath, look around and go, oh, this is the ideal. Okay, this is what I should do. Okay, start time again and I'll do it. So that's a cinematic technique, freezing time. We're taking these cinematic techniques and we're trying them out in training scenarios. Because what we're finding, but we don't have any, I don't have any studies that prove it, but anecdotally what I find is that once I've done it virtually and I have this power, then when I go in the real world, I can almost recall it because I can imagine it because I saw it. So for example, right now I can just imagine, what if I freeze you?
Yeah.
And well, I know what it's like to freeze people, I've done it before. And then I can do it in my mind and take a breath to figure out what to do.
Right, because of that sort of practice basically, the visualization is more possible for someone that maybe wasn't so good at doing it in the first place. Fascinating. Yeah, and of course that's the great thing, isn't it? Like there are physical sort of XYZ things, but there's also the temporal aspects.
Right.
And those time aspects are terribly interesting, but I think probably the most undiscovered of the sort of future applications, the idea of just playing with the experiences at different rates. So that's really interesting. Well, I certainly look forward to you publishing in that area. And thank you so much for taking time to show us this stuff. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by.
Well, thanks for that. I learned quite a few things during that interview. Mike? You know what? There's nothing dorkier than filming someone wearing a VR headset.
I'm actually at Chernobyl in the wasteland. The post. I don't want to actually go to Chernobyl because of the radiation, but it's quite interesting to have a look at it when you can.
I like the feature in the Samsung Gear VR where you can actually turn on the camera of the Samsung, so you're actually experiencing reality using the headset. So anyway, I think that's a great start to the term. One thing that's critical as always for us as part of these courses at FX PhD is having you guys ask questions in the forums. I think we certainly have this really solid plan for this, but we're always interested in getting input from you about what you'd like to see, as well as follow-up questions from the interviews and things that we're covering in the classes, because it really is a broad and changing industry that's important to have that kind of involvement.
I'm quite sure there'll be members that know stuff that we don't and can push us in directions of new stuff that's happening, but we have done a lot of research for this, but we just totally welcome you guys. And some of you may have some very good first-hand experience, and we'd love to hear about it.
Well, that's it for this class 1. We'll be on back and forth throughout the term, Mike and I, but in the meantime, thanks for being part of FX PhD.
See you soon.